The first question I have for you, and it's intrigued me endlessly, is just why did you decide to go into medicine? I mean, of all the things you could have done.
Yeah, I guess yes and no. I will say that growing up, my mother raised me with her family. My father left when I was 3. And I was raised in a small apartment in my grandfather's house, and with an interesting combination of people who raised me, my uncles and aunt and grandfather. And during that time, I'm an only child. The one thing that came across to me in our house was that the most respected person that everybody thought of was the doctor. There was no one who they held in higher esteem, and there was no one who they looked to when they were having troubles. They respected his opinion, and that stuck with me. And I think that, plus the fact that even though we really didn't have money or any kind of resources, no one in my family had gone to college, my mother raised me with this "you can be anything you want to be" attitude. And so in thinking about how to apply myself and where the values were, becoming a doctor was as high as I could aim. And so that, I think, was the start. I didn't know what being a doctor was other than what I saw when I was a patient, or what I heard from my family when they referred to the doctors, or what I saw on TV. And so the life that waited for me was a bit of an awakening, but welcome nonetheless. And that's what I didn't decide until I was in the 9th grade. We had a Father Silvestri at Bishop Duffy High School said, "If you don't know what you want to be right now, you're too late. You better decide, and decide quickly." And so I applied myself and thought about different things, and focused when I was in the 9th grade on becoming a physician. And from that moment, my whole focus was just the next step, getting into medical school, first getting into college, of course, and then from there.
Now, where in this adventure did you decide to go into obstetrics and gynecology?
That took a while longer. So like probably most people going into medicine, certainly when I went in, I wanted to be a general practitioner. That was the doctor I knew, and that was my picture of being a doctor. I modified that a little bit as I got closer to medical school and wanting to go into pediatrics. And we had a session early on in the first year of medical school in which they had students just meet with members of the specialty that they were drawn to. And so we had a bunch of us went to have a meeting with a pediatrician at his house just to chat. And I heard about there was a lot that was said, most of it positive, but in there was the remark of his frustration with parents who wouldn't do the right thing for their child. And that was just like I said, I cannot do that. I would decompensate if I was dealing with a parent who was not doing the right thing for their child. And that backed me off. And then I just started rethinking what it was I liked about medicine and different approaches to take. And with obstetrics and gynecology, I saw a field that was more general than being a general practitioner. It allowed me to do surgery. It allowed me to practice internal medicine, to deal with preventive medicine, to deal with women at different phases of their lives, and interestingly, during pregnancy, to deal with women when they were being their best selves. One thing I learned is that if you're dealing with a woman who's pregnant and you say you should do this because it'll be helpful for you and your baby, they do it. And so it had a lot of positive aspects that attracted me.
Very interesting. So now we're in the era of women in medicine,
Yep.
women in professions.
Yep.
Do you feel that you've had something to do with that?
I can't say that I'm responsible for that. I would say that medicine was taking that path when I entered it, and the opportunities for women increased. I would say that at this point in time, in obstetrics and gynecology, men are becoming much less of a factor. There are more women in medicine. Of the women who enter medicine, a higher percentage go into obstetrics and gynecology. And so we're at a point as we have this conversation where roughly 50% of the medical school classes are women, and 80+% of the residencies are women. Both because women are being drawn to it, and also because there's been some messaging that men may not be as welcome in the specialty as they once were. And so if we look at men who are graduating, a lower percentage, perhaps half or less than half of what it once was, are going into obstetrics and gynecology.
What do you think we can do to encourage women in medicine?
Well, I think women in medicine today have many opportunities and are advancing quite nicely. I think the challenges that arise right now have to do with family life. They have to do with the meaning of being a professional and committing yourself to your profession versus the commitments that draw us to our taking care of our families. And we're seeing it's not just more women facing this choice, but it's also two-physician families facing the choice. And so we're seeing an evolution in the practice of medicine. And that is, I think, an interesting place to focus at a time when there are concerns regarding burnout and there are concerns regarding overwork. If we look at the doctors who were practicing in the 70s or before, the amount of time they put into their professions was much greater than it is today. But they also weren't spending much time with their families. And they could have a more traditional, they were men and could have a more traditional wife and family life, but the kids didn't get to see them that often. Today we have not just more women in medicine, but more two-physician families where you don't have one parent who's a stay-at-home parent. And we are seeing basically the amount of hours being spent in practice dialed down, and more and more people actually going part-time. Some of the more recent statistics would be that in group practice, which is where most people are entering, 40% of women are practicing part-time.
I mean, you and I seem to be part of a kind of explosive time in medicine where specialization occurred, but now diversification into women and all kinds of people from every race, nationality, creed you can imagine becoming part of this family community of medicine.
Right.
In fact, I went here in my presidential year, I think was the first time where a male was preceded by and followed by women, both of whom were very accomplished people.
Right.
It continues to this day.
Right. Well, I think that, you know, the call of the women's liberation movement that occurred in the 60s and 70s was basically to treat women as equals, to recognize the value that they bring. I think as time passes, we're more often seeing that there are different approaches that a woman and a male may take to a similar situation, and that there is value to either approach. And so I think the concept of diversity occurs at several levels. And patients have choices they didn't once have. And I think the meaning of the physician-patient relationship is evolving.
Now, your role in education and research really has been quite remarkable. And you're associate clinical professor at UMass
In
Medical Center?
obstetrics and gynecology at UMass. I am not really an academic researcher. What few publications I've done, I've basically focused on problems that have surrounded infant mortality, which is a field that I got involved with a little later in my career. And that tracks back to some growing appreciation of the role of socioeconomic factors in health and the role of public health in health.
So one of the things that I always found remarkable about you was that you were objective. You were, and still are, very critically thinking, data-driven in that whole field. So what were some of the hallmarks of your presidency here, which was from 2007 to 2008? And I believe at that time I was senior medical advisor, so we were stuck with each other
Right.
day to day.
Sure.
So what was going on in your head at the time?
Well,
Great respect for the way
Yeah.
you would think about stuff.
I think in terms of, there were three things that drew me to seeking the presidency of the Medical Society when I did. It wasn't necessarily that I was looking to be president of the organization. It was that I had spent the previous, 15 or 20 years focusing on a few areas that were floating up to the surface and were becoming more critical. And I felt that I could basically apply some critical thinking, articulate a position that was consistent with our values, and be able to bring a skill set that I had spent some time acquiring to the situation. A few things were happening. One is that we were moving towards more universal coverage, and the issue of the uninsured was a major focus. And so something called Chapter 58 of the Massachusetts laws was one that sought to hopefully eliminate the uninsured and allow everyone to have insurance in one form or another. And we had spent a lot of time as a medical society at the table with other organizations, with the state government, and working with them to shape this legislation. And that was going to need someone to be able to understand it and explain it to the membership and also to the public. And that was something in which I had been immersed. The second issue had to do with concerns regarding quality and cost, and ways of measuring these that could be put into practice. And concurrent with the issue of universal insurance was a push on the part of many insurers and a push on the part of an organization called the Group Insurance Commission, which provided health insurance for all of the state's employees and therefore was the largest purchaser of health insurance in the state.
Yes.
They were all focused on ways of measuring quality
Yes.
and cost to try to get control of that. And I had spent several years chairing a committee here at the Medical Society called the Committee on the Quality of Medical Practice. And my immersion in this society occurred through that. It was with that committee. It had just been established when I decided to take a year off from my practice and go to Dartmouth and get a master's degree in health policy and quality measurement. And so the alignment of the mission of that committee with what I was learning at Dartmouth and working with a employee here at the Society, Elaine Kirschenbaum, who was just a very engaging and energetic and focused person. If you were in her orbit, then you were drawn into the Medical Society and you were going to put everything you had into it. So that combination drew me into the society. Those two issues became critical. And then I also had maintained an interest in electronic medical records, and the ability to exchange information, the ability to measure results and to measure what we're doing. I could see that that could be embedded into the electronic record, and that that would be something that we would be better for. But I also could see that the programs that were available were being developed by computer engineers who did not understand the workflow of a medical practice and did not understand the priorities of measuring quality on the part of physicians. And so one of my issues had to do with trying to engage physicians to become more active in the development of those programs so that they could be more useful to us. Long answer to a short question.
Yeah, I believe it's said by Henry Kissinger that you can have some of the most wonderful, far-reaching ideas, but it's the implementation that's the key.
Yep.
You know, whether you can actually do this stuff.
Right.
And coming into Chapter 58, which is the universal coverage, you were very much involved with that. Remember, we had the notion of universal responsibility.
Yep.
Everybody had to put their foot into this thing. The patients, the medical community, the politicians, the insurance plans, everybody. Nobody was going to get away with being off the hook. I mean, that was the coalition that brought Chapter 58 to exist. And we gained darn near close to universal insurance coverage, and without coverage, there's no significant, meaningful access.
Right.
But your challenge, as I watched you function, and I thought you did it brilliantly, was, okay, now how are we going to determine that what we're doing is worth something? It's quality. You were in that from point of view, automation, clinical research, seeing all that, and then also beginning to put your arms around the issue of cost. And I enjoyed immensely working with you and watching you lead us down the pathway towards implementation. And you teed up during your presidency the universal coverage for the country as a whole, the ACA, the Accountable Care Act.
Right.
That all occurred on your watch, so thank you for that.
All interesting and just a pleasure to be involved with. And I think the other piece, you know, I mentioned Elaine Kirschenbaum and the Committee on the Quality of Medical Practice, but I think one of the other great things about being president of the society is you get to work with a staff that allows you to be your best self. And so as someone who was very uncomfortable with public speaking and presenting and that sort of thing, to work with Frank Fortin and Rick Gulla and some others where they could work with me and tailor what I wanted to do and who I was to what they needed to see happen. It really was an incredible experience, and I took pleasure in. I actually, you know, as you know, you do presentations all the time. You're being interviewed all of the time, and I basically composed every presentation that I did. But then I would work with the staff and you know, polish it and refine it and everything. And I finished that year with a comfort level with speaking and with a ability to express myself that I feel was a real benefit.
So you grew, and the society grew as a result.
Right. Yeah.
Good collaboration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.